Wyoming Territory, summer of 1882. The wind screamed across the dry plains as if it could tear the past from your bones. But the girl in the saddle had nothing left to lose. Her name was Bethany Price, 21, and what was left of her world lay packed into a single carpetbag strapped behind her. Her dress was torn at the hem, her boots covered in dry dust, and her arms ached from holding the reins too tight for too long. Her lips were cracked. Her eyes were fixed ahead, like a woman chasing the last train out of hell. She had not eaten in 2 days. The trail led to a weather-beaten ranch nestled against the foothills west of Rawlins. A crooked fence, a one-story cabin, and a barn that looked like it had been built more out of will than wood. A man stood in the paddock, breaking a wild chestnut mare. He moved in slow, steady steps, hat tipped low, voice calm but firm. The horse bucked. He held his ground. Bethany stopped at the gate, throat dry. She had no plan beyond this. Just the name someone whispered to her in a freight yard 2 towns back. Find Porter Grady. Man does not turn folks away. She dismounted like her bones were older than her years. The man in the paddock glanced over, then walked toward her, wiping his hands on a rag. He was tall, 30 or so, with sun-browned skin and a lean build that spoke of hard work, not luck. His eyes were the color of river stone, steady but kind. "You lost?" he asked. Bethany's voice barely came. "No." She swallowed. "I have nowhere else to go." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Then you found the right place." She broke. Not loud. Just a shiver through her shoulders as she looked down at her boots. She felt his hand on her arm, not grabbing, just grounding. He led her toward the porch without a word, letting her lean on his strength without making her feel weak. Inside, the cabin was simple. One room, a fireplace, a battered table, and a bed tucked behind a curtain. He poured her water first. Then he gave her a plate of bread and leftover stew. She ate like someone who had not tasted food in weeks. When she finished, he sat across from her. "You got a name?" "Bethany Price." He nodded once. "Porter Grady." She looked down at her hands. "I'm not running from the law, if that's what you're thinking." "I was not." He waited, gave her room. "My father died last winter. We had a small homestead up near Buffalo. It was just me and my little brother, Preston." Her eyes went glassy. "He was 9. I buried him last month." She blinked, jaw tight. "Fever took him. I sold the land for almost nothing. Could not stay there. Too many ghosts." Porter's face did not shift, but his voice softened. "You got someone looking for you?" "No one." "All right." He stood, slow and sure. "You can stay in the bunkhouse. It is not much, but the roof holds and the stove works. Tomorrow, you can help around the ranch if you want. No charity here. Just fair trade." She nodded. "Thank you." "Come on, then." He led her back outside, grabbed a lantern, and walked her to the bunkhouse tucked behind the barn. It was plain cot, stove, and a wash basin, but it was clean. Safe. He handed her the lantern. "Get some sleep, Miss Price." "Bethany," she said, voice soft but sure now. He gave a nod. "Then good night, Bethany." That night, she lay on the cot and cried into the pillow with the door bolted tight behind her. Not from fear, but from the first flicker of safety she had felt in months. By the end of the week, she had found a rhythm. She helped feed the livestock, clean the tack, and learned to patch fence lines. Porter never hovered, but he was near, always steady, always watching without judging. One morning, she found a blue calico dress folded on the porch rail. Clean, her size. No note, just kindness. She wore it that Sunday. Porter looked up from splitting wood when she stepped out, and something in his gaze flickered. He touched the brim of his hat. "Looks good." Bethany smiled. "Thank you." They rode to town together that afternoon. He needed supplies. She needed to breathe somewhere that was not wrapped in memory. On the way back, the wind kicked up dust devils across the road. Her scarf blew from her neck, and she really laughed for the first time in months. Porter looked over, and his lips curved. "You got a nice laugh." She looked down, suddenly shy. "I forgot what it felt like." That night, he built a fire outside the cabin. They sat beside it, not talking much. She handed him coffee. Their hands touched for a second, long enough to notice. "You ever been married?" she asked. He shook his head. "Too busy trying to make something out of this land." "You?" "No," she stared into the fire. "I was too busy trying to keep my brother alive." Silence settled between them, but it was not empty. It was full of things that did not need saying yet. By August, the air turned sharper in the mornings. Bethany's skin darkened from the sun, her hands roughened from labor. But her eyes, Porter noticed, held light again. Sometimes she would hum while brushing the horses. Sometimes he would find her on the porch with a book and a blanket over her knees. One afternoon, she came into the barn, lips pressed tight. "Porter," he turned. "What is it?" She held out a letter. "Someone from Buffalo tracked me down. Saw my name on a land sale. Said my father borrowed money before he died. Said I owe it." He took the letter, read it. "The land is gone. They have no claim here." "I know. But they are coming." He folded the letter. "Then they can talk to me." She looked at him, eyes wide and searching. "Why are you helping me?" He paused. Then, quietly, "Because you are worth helping." Her voice cracked. "I do not know how to repay you." "You already are," he said, eyes on hers. "Every day you stay." She stepped forward, slow. "I feel safe here, Porter." His voice dropped. "I want you to." Their hands met. And this time, neither pulled away. Outside, the wind calmed. And for the first time since she had buried her brother, Bethany felt like she was standing on solid ground. She did not know it yet, but she had ridden straight into the only place she was ever meant to be. Porter stood on the porch with his arms folded, watching the dust trail rise from the east. The rider came slow, not in a rush, but sure of his direction. The sun lay low behind Porter, casting long shadows over the yard. Bethany stepped up beside him, her sleeves rolled and her palms still lined with dirt from the garden rows she'd been tending. "Is that him?" she asked, voice quiet. Porter nodded. "That's the man from the letter." She didn't speak again, just tightened her grip on the railing and waited. The rider dismounted at the gate without calling out. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with a long face and a neat coat that didn't match the land. His boots were polished, and his hat still held its shape. He didn't belong here, and he seemed to know it. "You Grady?" he asked. "I am." The man looked toward Bethany, then back at Porter. "Name's Saul Ridley, representing Mr. Hanlon out of Buffalo. I've come to collect on a debt." Porter stepped down from the porch. "You've come a long way for air." Ridley dismounted, brushing dust from his sleeves. "The Price family borrowed money. I have the notes. They signed." "No one's arguing about the paper," Porter said. "But the land was sold, the house torn down. You'll not get blood from a stone." Ridley's eyes moved to Bethany again. "She's still living. That makes her responsible." Bethany didn't flinch. "I didn't sign anything." "No, but your father did. And under the law, you'll take it up with me," Porter said, stepping between them. "She works here, eats here, sleeps under my roof. Whatever trouble you bring to me." Ridley's mouth tightened. "You're not her kin." "No, sir," Porter said. "But that don't matter." The two men stared at each other, quiet but stiff. Then Ridley pulled a folded paper from his coat and handed it over. "I'll be staying in Rawlins through the week. If she wants to settle this quiet, have her come find me." He turned back to his horse and mounted with a stiffness that betrayed the saddle wasn't his usual seat. After the rider had gone, Bethany let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Porter unfolded the paper, read it, then tucked it into his shirt pocket. "I'll talk to someone in town," he said. "See if this'll hold up." "I don't want you paying it," she said. "I won't. But lies stick longer than truth if they're loud enough." That evening, she didn't go to the bunkhouse. She brought her stitching to the porch instead, and Porter joined her with a cup of chicory. The sun dropped low, and the crickets started up in the brush. They didn't talk for a while, just let the quiet settle around them. "I thought I was done with trouble," she said, threading her needle. "You're not the one that brought this." "I know, but it follows me, Porter, even when I think I've outrun it." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You didn't outrun it. You stood still and let it find you. That's not the same thing." She looked over. "I'm tired of fighting." He nodded. "Then let me help carry it." She didn't answer, but her hand drifted toward his on the bench between them. He didn't move away. They sat like that until the moon rose, the lantern left cold beside them. The next morning, Bethany didn't go to the pasture. She rode into town with Porter instead. She kept her back straight in the saddle, her hair pinned up under a bonnet she'd mended herself. They stopped at the courthouse first, then the livery, then the bank. Each step slow, deliberate. Porter spoke little, but everyone they met looked at her different when he stood beside her. At the last stop, the sheriff came out to meet them, reading over the same paper Ridley had left. "This fella's got no teeth," the sheriff said, handing the letter back. "Debt died with the man who owed it. He's just hoping you won't know better." Bethany looked at Porter. He didn't smile, but something eased in his shoulders. They rode home without hurry. The prairie grass swayed gold and green in the wind. A hawk circled high overhead. "I thought I'd feel relief," she said after a long stretch of silence. "But I just feel empty." "That's grief," Porter said. "It don't know how to leave all at once." She wiped at her cheek with the back of her glove. "You always this steady?" "No. Just learn not to let the wind take me." They reached the ranch before dusk. Porter unsaddled the horses while Bethany brought water from the well. When they met at the barn door, she paused. "Would you have done all this for anyone?" "No," he said. She looked at him, eyes steady. "Why me?" He didn't answer right away. Then, quiet as the dust settling at their boots, he said, "Because when you came through that gate, I knew you weren't just passing through." Bethany reached for the barn door, but stopped. Her voice was soft. "I don't want to pass through anymore." He nodded. "Then stay." The sun slipped behind the hills, and the lanterns in the windows glowed warm. She followed him inside, not because she had nowhere left to go, but because, for the first time, she had somewhere she wanted to be. The first frost came with a hush. White veils draped over the pasture grass in the early hours, the kind of cold that settled into wood and bone before the sun had a chance to burn it off. Bethany stepped outside with a shawl tight across her shoulders, her breath curling like smoke in the morning light. Porter was already out, hauling hay to the lean-to, his coat dusted with frost at the collar. She crossed the yard, still barefoot from sleep. "Didn't think it'd come this soon." He looked up, eyes meeting hers beneath the brim of his hat. "Weather don't ask. I was hoping for one more warm week. The garden's not done. We can cover the rows. Got canvas in the loft." She nodded and followed him to the barn, stepping carefully over frozen ruts. Inside, the air was warmer, the scent of hay and horse sweat thick in the rafters. He handed her a bundle of canvas and a length of rope, his hand brushing hers in the pass. "I heard back from the land office," he said. She paused, arms cradling the canvas. "What for?" "Filed the deed to the north field under both our names. You've worked it same as me. Fair's fair. I didn't ask for that. You didn't have to." He turned back, toward the ladder. "You want to stake a future, you need something solid under your boots." They worked side by side through the morning, covering the garden rows, beating frost from the cabbage heads, tying down the canvas with gloved hands. Her fingers stiffened from the cold, but she didn't complain. When they finished, she sat down on the edge of the wagon bed and peeled off her gloves, blowing into her palms. Porter leaned against the fence post beside her, quiet for a while. "You ever think about going back to Buffalo?" he asked. She looked out past the barn, where the hills rolled toward the horizon like sleeping cattle. "No, not even for the good memories." There weren't many. She turned toward him. "You?" He shook his head once. "I left Missouri when I was 16. Nothing I'd want to carry back." She watched his face, the way his jaw set when he didn't want to say more than he should. "You had a family?" "I did. Not anymore." She didn't press. The silence that followed was easy. Later that afternoon, Bethany took the mending basket to the porch and stitched by the fading light. Porter brought his saddle out for oiling and sat beside her, the leather creaking as he worked the cloth into the worn spots. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked, eyes still on her thread. He didn't look up. "I think about what needs doing tomorrow. That's as far ahead as I get. I think about it more lately. What kind of life I might want. If it's possible to make one from pieces. You're already doing that. I don't like doing it alone." He set the saddle aside and looked at her fully then, not from the corner of his eye, but with the full weight of his attention. "You're not alone." Her hand stilled on the fabric. "I know. I just need to believe it'll stay that way." Porter leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low. "I built this place for myself. Thought that was all I'd ever need. But it's different now. Feels different with you here. Like it's not just mine anymore. Like it's ours." She looked down at her lap, fingers gripping the edge of the cloth. "I don't have much to offer." "That's not true. I don't mean work. I mean what comes after. I don't know how to be someone's wife. I never had an example. My ma died before I was old enough to see how she lived." "You don't have to know everything right away," he said. "All you need is the want." She met his eyes. "I do." He reached for her hand, slow enough she could pull away if she wanted. But she didn't. Their fingers laced together, the porch quiet but for the creak of the boards and the wind threading through the grass. That night, Porter brought in a second quilt from the trunk and laid it across the bed in the room behind the curtain. When he turned, Bethany was standing at the threshold, her hair loose and her boots off. She didn't ask. She just crossed the room, reached for his hand, and together they settled into the bed as the fire burned low. No rush, no words. Just the warmth of two people choosing the same hearth, the same breath, the same long road forward. Outside, the frost thickened, but inside, the stillness was soft and full of promise. By mid-October, the wind had turned sharper, and the mountains wore their first dusting of snow like a warning. Bethany spent more time indoors, sewing flannel linings into their work shirts and boiling down the last of the plum preserves. Porter hauled in firewood in measured stacks, always 3 arms wide, 3 arms high, and just enough for a week at a time. One evening, as the wind scraped dry leaves against the windows, Bethany stood at the hearth, her apron damp from washing the floors. "You ever think about adding to this place?" she asked without turning. Porter looked up from where he was carving new handles for the draw knives. "What do you mean? Room for more than 2. A real kitchen. Maybe a second barn." He set the blade down and leaned back in the chair. "I've thought about it. Just never had reason to do more than get by." She turned then, wiping her hands on a cloth. "You have reason now." His eyes stayed on hers. "I do." She crossed the room and sat across from him. "I'd like to see it grow. Not just because it's ours, but because it's alive. And I want to raise something that lasts." Porter rested his hand palm down on the table, close but not reaching. "You thinking of staying through spring then?" "I'm thinking of staying for good." The fire cracked between them. He didn't smile, but the corners of his mouth softened. "I've been drawing up plans in my head," he said. "For a second room off the back. Maybe a loft." Bethany's voice dropped. "I'd like a place for children someday." He didn't answer right away, but the silence was steady, not uncertain. When he did speak, his voice was low. "I'd raise them with you." She nodded once, as if the decision had already been made. The next morning, Porter hitched the wagon and drove them to a sawmill near the river bend, a full 2 hours west. The road was rough, the air brisk, and they shared a wool blanket across their knees. Bethany pointed out birds along the fence lines, her knowledge of the land sharper now. Porter listened, content to let her voice carry them through the ride. At the mill, he bartered for fir planks and iron nails, while Bethany negotiated for a stove with a warming shelf. She'd grown into the place, not just in chores but in presence, her back straight, her words measured, her eyes level with every man who tried to talk past her. On the way home, the wagon heavier, she rested her head lightly on his shoulder. He didn't shift or speak, just let the warmth of her settle against him. 2 days later, the ground broke behind the cabin. Porter dug the post holes while Bethany hauled water and held the line taut. The new room would take time, but neither of them seemed rushed. Each board driven was a promise, each nail a root. That Sunday, Reverend Brooks came out from Rollins to bless the land and take supper with them. He was an old friend of Porter's, and his beard held more white than red these days. "Looks like God's been working in you," he told Porter as they stood out by the fence line, watching Bethany carry a kettle to the fire. "She's been the one building," Porter said. Brooks nodded. "That's usually how he works. Through the hands of the right people." After the Reverend left, they sat outside wrapped in a quilt, the stars bright overhead and the fire just coals. Bethany leaned against Porter's side, her voice quiet. "I want to be married before the first snow." Porter slid his arm around her shoulders. "Then we'll be married before the first snow." She tilted her face up toward his. "You sure?" He kissed her forehead, slow and sure. "There's nothing I want more." She closed her eyes and breathed him in, the scent of wood smoke and pine and something she could finally name as home. The land around them slept, but inside the walls they were building, something new was unfolding, steady as sunrise, certain as winter, and warm enough to outlast both. Snow fell the morning Reverend Brooks returned, soft as sifted flour across the roof and grounds. It didn't come sudden, it had whispered through the night, tapping at the glass with a hush that asked permission. Bethany stood at the window, one hand resting on the sill, the other tucked around a cup of steaming chicory. Porter had passed her before stepping out to meet the Reverend's wagon. She wore the same blue calico dress from that first Sunday, let out at the seams and stitched with new cuffs. Her hair was braided back, pinned at the base of her neck with a silver comb. Porter had given her 2 weeks earlier, a quiet gift, pressed into her palm without a word, its edges worn smooth from use. Porter returned with the Reverend before the snow had time to deepen. They shook their boots off on the porch, then stepped into the warmth together. The Reverend looked around the cabin and gave a low whistle. "You've filled it with something strong," he said, nodding to Bethany. She smiled, tucking her hands under her apron. "It's the land," she said. "It teaches you to stay rooted." The ceremony was small. No guests but the land itself, bearing witness through the window panes. Porter stood facing her near the hearth, his hair still damp from snow, his hands steady. Reverend Brooks spoke plainly, without flourish, his voice low and clear. There were no rings, but their promises didn't need metal to make them binding. When it was done, Porter rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm across her cheek. "We'll build slow," he said, "but we'll build it right." Bethany nodded. "As long as we build it together." That night, Bethany lit every lantern and placed a sprig of pine above the door. They ate by firelight stew from the same pot, bread warmed on the hearthstone, and afterward, sat close on the bed, Porter's arm around her waist. The wind outside picked up, but inside, nothing moved but the shadows and their quiet laughter. Winter settled in piece by piece. Days shortened, and the animals took to their stalls early. Bethany spent mornings near the stove, her hands busy with wool and thread, while Porter worked on the new room, one board at a time. He never rushed the work. Each beam was measured twice, each corner joined tight. Bethany would bring him coffee in the afternoons, and he'd rest beside her on a bench he'd built from leftover pine. "You ever think it might be too quiet here?" she asked once, her breath fogging the rim of her tin cup. "I used to," he said, "but not anymore." By January, the second room was framed and roofed. Bethany painted the window frames with leftover whitewash, while Porter cut floorboards. They spoke less while they worked now, not from distance, but from comfort. Everything that needed saying passed between them in glances, in the way she handed him the hammer before he asked, in the way he brushed snow from her braid before she stepped inside. When the thaw began in March, the first shoots of green pushed through the soil behind the barn, and Bethany knelt barefoot in the dirt, her palms dark with earth. Porter watched her from the fence line, hands resting on the gate, his breath caught somewhere between pride and something deeper he didn't yet have a name for. That night, she leaned against him beneath the quilts, her fingers tracing the lines of his forearm. "I'd like to teach, someday," she said. "Not just letters. Practical things. How to hold a house together. How to plant. Stitch. Cook with nothing but bark and bone if you have to. You'd be good at that." "I think I would. You want to use the new room for it?" She looked up at him, her eyes soft in the dark. "You wouldn't mind? It's your house, too." By April, the fields were tilled, the fence mended, and the new room painted. Bethany opened the shutters every morning and wrote out lessons by hand. Word spread quiet and respectful. Porter's wife was offering schooling on the ranch. Girls came first, daughters of ranchers and widows. Then boys, too. Once it was clear she taught them all the same. Porter added a bench out front for parents who waited. Sometimes he sat there himself, carving small toys from scrap wood, handing them to the children without comment when lessons ended. That summer, the garden bloomed thick, and Bethany hung herbs to dry from every beam in the cabin. Porter built her a cupboard for them, carved with a simple star at the top. They danced once, slow and barefoot in the dirt behind the house, to the sound of frogs and wind. No music but the hush of dusk and the sound of laughter between them. In August, Bethany laid his hand against her belly without speaking. He looked from her face to her hand, then back again. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice thin. "As sure as I've ever been." He held her then, both arms around her waist, his cheek to her temple. No tears, just the weight of something immense settling between them. They didn't tell anyone until the first frost came again. By then, the new season had its own rhythm. The schoolroom quieted, and the benches emptied. Bethany walked slower, but still rose before sunup. Porter added a cradle beside the bed, carved with the same star. On the last night of November, just as the first snow began to fall, She woke him with a whisper. "It's time." He lit the lantern, calm in motion, and wrapped her coat around her shoulders. The midwife came at dawn, and by dusk, a daughter lay swaddled in Bethany's arms, her hair dark as loam, her mouth round with sleep. Porter knelt beside the bed, calloused fingers brushing the child's cheek. "What do we call her?" he asked. Bethany looked down at the girl, then up at him. "Mercy," she said, "for all we were given." He nodded, voice caught. "Mercy." The snow thickened outside, blanketing the land they'd built together. Inside, the lamp burned low, soft and steady, casting warm light over 3 sleeping forms in a house that no longer held just survival, but belonging, earned, rooted, and unshakably real. And so the winter passed, not as a hardship, but as a season of warmth. The cabin held laughter, small footsteps, and the smell of bread baking in the morning. Bethany and Porter, side by side through each chore and each quiet evening, built not only a home, but a life full of the kind of love that grows slow and true and never once lets go.